to help us appreciate the lessons from Nebuchadnezzar this hour. There is a very good scripture that would tilt our mind in the right direction, and that is in Psalm 103, and reading there verses 1 through to 4. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgiveth all thine iniquities, who healeth all thy diseases, who redeemeth thy life from destruction, who crowneth thee with loving kindness and tender mercies. Nebuchadnezzar was blessed so richly, and as we are studying him, we observe his forgetfulness of the blessings that are poured upon him, and he ascribes it to himself. And so we are admonished in this reading that the blessings that we have experienced from the Lord, that he has forgiven us for our iniquities in the past, that we know he has, that we must not forget that when we come into other circumstances and we think, wow, although I have had such a wonderful experience at my earlier conversion, now I feel completely dejected and hopeless. And he does not forget us, and we mustn't forget him. And so, as we have been contemplating the life of Nebuchadnezzar to this point in time, after years of God's manifestations to Nebuchadnezzar, one would think that he would never forget. But such is sinful human nature that it easily becomes taken off its track of what it has experienced. We become sidetracked into so many other avenues, so that what we have learnt, we quickly unlearn again or lose. And here we read this in the Youth Instructor, November 1, 1904, in paragraph 2. Looking at Nebuchadnezzar and observing this, in the providence of God, Nebuchadnezzar was given ample opportunity to ascribe to the Lord the glory for the splendor of his reign. Now, did you pick up something here? He was given plenty of opportunity to ascribe to the Lord the glory for the splendor of his reign. The principle is not just remembering the Lord, it's remembering his blessings. And Nebuchadnezzar had plenty of opportunity, like we have. And for a time after the vision of the great image, he acknowledged God as supreme, falling back into idolatrous habits. He was again by the miraculous deliverance of the 3 Hebrews from the fiery furnace, led to acknowledge that God's kingdom is an everlasting kingdom and his dominion is from generation to generation. But once more, the king perverted the warnings God had given him and turned aside from the path of humility to follow the imaginations of his naturally proud heart. I'm reading this slowly so that we will pick up the principles here, because we're not talking about just generally forgetting about God. We wouldn't forget about God, would we? No. But can we forget his benefits? Can we forget what Nebuchadnezzar forgot? That the glory that God had given him was from God and not from himself. And that we might pervert some of the warnings we've received in the past and fall back to some of our old ways. And so it goes on to say that once more the king had done it even after the furnace experience. And what happened? The imaginations of his natural proud heart carried him away. The natural proud heart. Thinking that his kingdom should be more extensive and powerful than any that would follow. This time he didn't build an image. What did he do? He made great additions to the city of Babylon and gave himself up to a life of pleasure and self-glorification. Of this time he himself says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house and flourishing in my palace. He had it good. And the concept of that his kingdom should be weakened in any way, he worked so hard to prevent that from happening by enlarging it and making it more consolidated. The natural heart is at work. And so we ask the question, what is it that causes people to lose their sharp sensitivity to the overtures of God's blessings and spiritual effect? How can it be that it can be lost? What can we learn from Nebuchadnezzar? How we can lose those impressions that had once affected us, and then we become a little Laodicean again. Well, we have the counsel of the Spirit of prophecy, that we can understand how this happens to us as well as to him. And we come again to that book SS, page 267, paragraph 2. And reading there from along near the bottom of the paragraph, as he, Nebuchadnezzar, added nation after nation to the Babylonian realm, he added more and more to his fame as the greatest ruler of the age. What was he doing? He was going forth and occupying his time bringing more nations under his realm. That was one thing. And the other one was, as we were just reading before, he was extending the city, spending time doing this, occupying his mind doing that. And there in paragraph 3 it goes on to say, it was not surprising that the successful, proud-spirited monarch should be tempted to turn aside from the path of humility, which alone leads to true greatness. What leads to true greatness? Humility. Which alone leads to true greatness. Between his wars of conquest, he gave much thought to the beautifying of his capital until the city of Babylon became the golden city, the praise of the whole earth. His success in making Babylon one of the wonders of the world ministered to his pride until he was in grave danger of spoiling his record as a ruler whom God could use. So as you meditate on these words, we see him not only occupying his mind and his thoughts with enlarging his empire and then making his city more beautiful. His thoughts were occupied, and imagine, going and conquering nations. These are big enterprises. And building a city, big enterprises, lots of mind occupation. And so although he had these powerful revelations of God in his life, he was being occupied in his mind on other things, so he could quickly lose that. And besides that, as he was enriching the glory of his kingdom, the temptation for his proud heart to come back into function again, thinking, look at this. This is so wonderful. I have done this. Jesus gives us some very wonderful light upon this matter of occupying our mind and our time and our efforts in different areas which overflow our mind so that we forget the impressions that we had once received. It's written in the words of Jesus in Mark chapter 4, verse 19. Mark chapter 4, verse 19, where Jesus is speaking about he's relating the parable of the wheat, the seed that is sown, and the different ways by which it is lost. He says, and the cares of this world. What's that? The cares of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches, and the lusts of other things entering in, choke the word, and it becometh unfruitful. So Jesus is saying that which we have gained in his word, that has given us a beautiful conversion, that has given us beautiful experiences, all of a sudden things come in that crowd out those mental exercises, and we think of everything else but the memory of Jesus and of those beautiful things we have been gaining. We read also the words of Luke on the similar subject, Luke 21, verse 34. Luke 21, verse 34. And here Jesus specifically gives us this counsel. And take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness. Well, we think we don't do that, do we? No, but this. And cares of this life. And so that day come upon you unawares. That we forget. This is what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. He was overcharged with his kingdom, with enlarging his kingdom. His mind was occupied with enlarging it so that it can become consolidated and it won't fall. That's what he was hoping. Let the spirit of prophecy help us for the application of this understanding, of this lesson, because there is much written in reference to what Jesus said, that the cares of this life, cares that are so essential, especially in today's circumstances, so much is crowded into the mind in this fast age. And in Christ Object Lesson, Sister White helps our meditation here, how it's possible to lose the impressions just like Nebuchadnezzar did. On page 51 of Christ Object Lessons, paragraph 2, through to 52, paragraph 1. She addresses the words, the cares of this world. Notice what she says. No class is free from the temptation to worldly care. No class. To the poor, toil and deprivation and the fear of want bring perplexities and burdens. To the rich comes fear of loss and a multitude of anxious cares. Wasn't that the case with Nebuchadnezzar? He had a fear that his kingdom would lose somewhere. So he was really pumping his mind with to prevent that from happening. Fear of loss and a multitude of anxious cares. Many of Christ's followers, now follow this carefully, are we Christ's followers? Many of Christ's followers forget the lesson he has bidden us learn from the flowers of the field. They do not trust to his constant care. They forget. They do not trust to his constant care. Christ cannot carry their burden because they do not cast it upon him. Have you ever caught yourself doing that? There is this concern and that fear and that financial problem and this and that and the other thing and oh, I'm anxious. I'm filled with concern, and you can't just forget about it. You've got to work hard to try and keep it, to save yourself from financial problems. And so we forget that God takes care of the flowers. Can't he take care of us? We do not cast our burden upon him. We carry it. Therefore, the cares of this life, which should drive them to the Saviour for help and comfort, separate them from him. What should our cares do? They should drive us to him. But no, we get so occupied with the burdens of the cares and the anxieties associated with that our mind is oppressed. We become frustrated with this or that, and Jesus is at a distance. We're not trusting him. Oh, that the Lord would help us to get hold of this principle. You have no idea how much I see this happening around me all the time. There is a crushed look on the face that tells me you're not at peace. There is this anxious look that tells me no trust in God. I'm carrying this burden myself. This is what Jesus is trying to help us not to go down that path. It goes on to say, many who might be fruitful in God's service become bent on acquiring wealth. Their whole energy is absorbed in business enterprises, and they feel obliged to neglect things of a spiritual nature. What do they feel obliged to? To neglect things of a spiritual nature. Obliged. Because I've got this business to take care of. We're looking at Nebuchadnezzar. That's exactly what he was doing. It goes on to say, thus they separate themselves from God. We are enjoined in the Scriptures to be not slothful in business. Correct. We are to labor that we may impart to him who needs. Christians must work. They must engage in business, and they can do this without committing sin. But many become so absorbed in business that they have no time for prayer, no time for the study of the Bible, no time to seek and serve God. At times, the longings of the soul go out for holiness and heaven. But there is no time to turn aside from the din of the world to listen to the majestic and authoritative utterances of the Spirit of God. As we saw in Nebuchadnezzar's life, God came to him in great authoritative majesty, but then he had no more time for that, to continue in the memory of it. And then he lost it, and so do we. And then we wonder, why have I lost something I had? Have you ever experienced that? You had something, and then you lost it, and you wondered why. Here is the reason. The things of eternity are made subordinate. The things of the world supreme. It is impossible for the seed of the word to bring forth fruit, for the life of the soul is given to nourish the thorns of worldliness. And many who are working with a very different purpose fall into a like error. Now follow this one carefully. We work and we occupy ourselves with something a little bit better than just the cares of riches, etc., etc. They are working for others' good. Their duties are pressing. Their responsibilities are many. And they allow their labor to crowd out devotion. Isn't it right for us to work for the good of others? But what happens? It's another error. We become so wrapped up to work for the good of others that what happens? We become so pressed with duties that to take time to be holy is crowded out. Now, I want us to think very carefully how that actually happens. Just reflect back for a moment on we should be ready for the Sabbath when it comes, shouldn't we? But then so many duties, so many things that we're doing, and even on the Friday, where we should be devoting ourselves to the cause of getting ready for Sabbath, so many other things crowd in. And we go rush to the last minute, and then we are so overcrowded that our mind can't even absorb the deep and gentle and beautiful influences of the Holy Spirit, because the mind has been crowded. That's just an example. There's so many examples of this nature. So, the responsibilities that press upon us because we're doing others good, we want to make them happy, we forget our own need. Communion with God through prayer and a study of His Word is neglected. Why are we supposed to have communion with God and the study of His Word? Not just to get information, but to be reminded of His wonderful power that has been played out in front of us in the past. To keep that alive. Communion with God through prayer and the study of His Word is neglected. They forget that Christ has said, "Without me, you can do nothing." They walk apart from Christ, and their life is not pervaded by grace, and the characteristics of self are revealed. What's that? What is this? By being distracted from remembering these things, our life is separated from the consciousness of the Lord's blessings and the Lord's guidance and presence in our life. Their life is not pervaded by His grace, and the characteristics of self are revealed. Their service is marred. What does it mean for the characteristics of self to be revealed? Their service is marred by desire for supremacy, that's one thing, and the harsh, unlovely traits of the unsubdued heart. Have you ever been perplexed that you wanted to be Christ-like, and then you aren't? And then you become harsh and unlovely in your expressionism to your fellow man? Why? For this reason. Because we are walking apart from Christ, which has happened because we have been doing so much good for others that we are so crowded that we have no time to keep our spirit sweet. We become harsh and unlovely. Here is one of the chief secrets of failure in Christian work. This is why its results are so often so meager. Oh, God is answering our needs here. How important it is that we take this to heart as we look upon Nebuchadnezzar's forgetfulness. This is our own problem, and God is trying to help us. And so we read also another enlargement of this from, again, the Youth Instructor, November 1, 1904, where we were reading before, and I read this time paragraph 3. Nebuchadnezzar did not continue to walk in the light he had received from heaven. He lost the holy impressions that had been made upon his mind. What's that? He didn't just forget what God had done. He lost his holy impressions that had been made upon his mind. That's what happens. And because the holy impressions are lost sight of, we drift into this cold-hearted way again. We forget the holy love that has generated me in the past, that made me kind and courteous to my family, to my husband, my wife, and we become used to each other, and we can't communicate sweetly anymore. Here's the reason. That's the reason, no other reason. We want to get to the bottom of why we fall and why we fail. This is the reason. Through all these mind-occupying events and pressures around us, we lose the holy impressions that had been made upon our mind. But now comes the wonderful comfort. Don't despair if that has happened. God, in his mercy, gave the king another dream to save him, if possible, from appropriating to himself the glory that belonged to the supreme ruler. To save us from drifting along without the presence of Jesus right in our midst, right in our mind. And in this we may take courage. God will assist us, as illustrated in Nebuchadnezzar's life. And if my heart is like Nebuchadnezzar's heart, remember that innate sense of right, that innate sense of godliness that was there, if that is there, God will arouse it again. And we don't want to despair because I have failed him. I want to quickly pick myself up again by fleeing to him as he gives me this privilege and opportunity. So what was it that we read there that God gave to Nebuchadnezzar? In mercy, God gave the king another dream to warn him of his peril. And so here it is, Daniel chapter 4, verse 10 to 17. And to read this is 8 verses, but it's all encapsulated right here in this picture. You just look at the picture, that's what we read here in Daniel 4, verses 10 through to 17. Thus were the visions of mine head in my bed. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew, and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowl of the heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher and an holy one came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, Hew down the tree, and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, and scatter his fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from its branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field. And let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. So this was a dream. This was the second dream that God had given to Nebuchadnezzar. This time he knew what the dream was. But notice how, once again, how far he had backslidden since the fiery furnace humiliation and the memory of the time that he had his first dream. Where does he go for the explanation of the dream? If he had a memory, and he knew he had Daniel there, he knew that he had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego there, why didn't he immediately go there? Because he'd been sidetracked. He went along the path of familiarity, the familiar path that he used to go through. He went straight according to verses Daniel 4 there, verses 4 to 7. Where did he go? Um, 4 to 7. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house, and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the vision of my head troubled me. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. Then came in the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And I told the dream before them, but they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. Oh, what short memory. And this is so real to the natural heart. We will always go along the path of past habits. That's the principle we see here. He went straight back to there, what he was used to his magicians, to his astrologers, instead of remembering the God of Daniel. If we pay attention at this moment, how that he went to them first, but then because he was stumped again, they could not explain the vision. Of course, Daniel. Verse 8. But, notice the way it reads here. It's Nebuchadnezzar writing. He says, but at last. But at last Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and before him I told the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee, and no secret troubleth thee, tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen, and the interpretations thereof. We come to verse 18. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof, forasmuch as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation. But thou art able, for the Spirit of the Holy God is in thee. He'd come back to his senses. You see, God rattles people's memories sometimes when they go along the path of natural conclusions, natural habits, and then they fail. And this is a very important thing for us to understand. We go along the natural path and we think, what did I do this for? I remember how God helped me before. Why am I doing this? See how the experience of Nebuchadnezzar is touching ours? We read here from the spirit of prophecy to let the Spirit of God touch our imagination and our meditation. As we turn to the book Manuscript Releases, volume 13. 13 MR, page 63, paragraph 3. Daniel was esteemed by the king because of his unswerving integrity, for he was faithful in honoring God at all times and in all places. His wisdom was unexcelled, and neither he nor his fellows would make any compromise to secure positions in the court, or even to preserve life itself when the honor of God was involved. In the early part of his acquaintance with Daniel, the king had found that he was the only one who could give him relief in his perplexity. And now, at a later period, when another perplexing vision is given him, he remembers Daniel. He remembers Daniel. At last. Yeah, I love the way he put it there. At last. What am I doing? Why didn't I remember that to start with? At last. And so you can see he's making progress. He's making progress in his sensitivity, even though he has fallen back so many times. He is at least able to remember when things fail around him. The Lord. Now we have a very interesting object lesson here. A very interesting object lesson. The faithfulness of God's servant. Did you notice here? He recognized that Daniel was a faithful servant of God. The faithful servants of God are used of him. And the light comes here to understand the difference between leaning on the arm of flesh versus leaning on the arm of the Lord. What was Nebuchadnezzar to do in leaning on the arm of the Lord? He was to call Daniel. That meant leaning on the arm of the Lord, not on the arm of flesh. Before, he was leaning on the arm of flesh by calling his magicians. Now he called Daniel, and that meant leaning on the arm of the Lord. Very vivid understanding of what it means to lean on the arm of flesh versus the arm of the Lord in human beings. And we read it here in Manuscript Releases, volume 13, and paragraph 3. That's which we just read there. Daniel was esteemed by the king because of his unswerving integrity, for he was faithful in honoring God. Well, let's come to another one in 19 MR, page 220, paragraph 3. And there, very vividly, the same thing that Nebuchadnezzar did, we need to do today, to lean on the arm of the Lord. Follow carefully. God today is as surely speaking by his servants as in past ages. He has his messengers today as in ancient times. But those souls who have not had divine enlightenment, who have no deep and rich experience in the things of God, know not by experience the things of God. Know not by experimental knowledge at what they stumble. What did you read here? To receive help from those today whom God is saying are my servants, like they were back there in Daniel's time. It is people who, by experience in the things of God, by experimental knowledge, know where people stumble, who have made an experience with God so that they can communicate God's arm to the people. Many people are so infatuated, deluded by the enemy, rejecting offered mercy, when the Eternal Father is seeking to save them by the cross of Calvary. Oh, that hearts might be touched by the love of Jesus. Interesting way of expressing herself here. She's talking about God having his faithful servants. And then she says, but there are people who cannot be trusted because they are by experience not the servant of God. And so the Lord has made something else very clear in the lessons from Nebuchadnezzar. Now observe how Nebuchadnezzar has definitely progressed from all those past experiences. Nebuchadnezzar respects what is communicated to him now, even though what was told him through the dream was against him. Follow there in Daniel chapter 4, verse 19, because in verse 18 he had said, Daniel, you show me now, what is this dream about? And Daniel was in shock. He knew exactly what that dream meant. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonished for 1 hour, and his thoughts troubled him. The king spake and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. Belteshazzar answered and said, My lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. But Nebuchadnezzar said, don't let it trouble you. Okay, it's against me, never mind. Tell me what it means. Here is the magnanimity of Nebuchadnezzar once again. His heart is touched in the right direction, and he permits the message to come home. Notice how Daniel, in trying to help King Nebuchadnezzar, speaks to him in verse 27. Having explained the vision to him, it says, Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be accepted unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities, by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. So not only does Daniel communicate what the vision means, but tells him that, look, this tree is you, and you are going to go insane for 7 years, and the kingdom is going to be taken from you. That was the explanations from verse 20 down to verse 26. But then he says, look, it's a warning. Don't fall for it. Break off your sins by righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. If you would make restitution, you will be tranquil, you won't go insane. Break off your sins. How well did this dream and the explanation of Daniel take root in Nebuchadnezzar? Did he do what Daniel told him? He was touched with the explanation. He was convicted. But we read here in Manuscript Releases Again, volume 13 MR, reading there from page 64, paragraph 2. Then Daniel exhorted the king, as we have before presented, to break off his sins by righteousness, and his iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Now notice, but the light from heaven was not accepted, and he did not exert a saving influence, and this did not exert a saving influence upon his character. Those who receive light will either change their course of action, or else the work of the Lord will become less and less palatable and will finally be set aside. Did you pick something up here? The work of the Lord becomes less and less palatable. If I don't listen to the counsel of the Lord that impresses me, after a while I don't want to hear it anymore. Have you been in that place? I've had people actually saying, John, stop. I can't take anymore. And sometimes I feel like our conferences, where I have been labouring, people say, this is too much. Oh, please stop. Can't we have a break? I know that has been said. It becomes less palatable. Why? Because we haven't made the deliberate, genuine changes by stopping the crowding of our mind by all those things that crowd us, and we think we have to do this, and we think we have to do that, and we haven't got any time to mold my mind by time with the Lord, by communion with Him for periods of time, so that then I can go back to my duties with refreshed and fragrance of spirit. So then the messages of the Lord, come on, break off your iniquities, become a grindstone. Do I have to hear that all the time? It doesn't become a grindstone when we're listening and we are in in the realm of the joys of meditation in the Lord, then it's, yes, thank you, that was good, that's fine. But it becomes less palatable because we are too crowded by the cares of this world. And here is the lesson for us as it is expressed so powerfully in Bible Commentary, Volume 4. Bible Commentary, Volume 4, page 1170, paragraph 4. We are living in the last days of this earth's history, and we may be surprised at nothing in the line of apostasies and denials of the truth. Unbelief has now come to a fine art which men work at to the destruction of their souls. What's this? Unbelief to a fine art. But I don't have unbelief, do I? Well, be careful, because it's such a fine art you don't recognize its unbelief. There is constant danger of there being shams in pulpit preachers whose lives contradict the words they speak, but the voice of warning and of admonition will be heard as long as time shall last, and those who are guilty of transactions that should never be entered into, when reproved or counselled through the Lord's appointed agencies, will resist the message and refuse to be corrected. When the servant of God, seeing the danger that the church is in, expresses the reproofs and counsels, because the mind is crowded and it has lost connection with Jesus, the voice of rebuke becomes a nagging discomfort. They will resist the message and refuse to be corrected, as did Nebuchadnezzar. They will go on, as did Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar, until the Lord takes away their reason and their hearts become unimpressible. The Lord's word will come to them, but if they choose not to hear it, the Lord will make them responsible for their own ruin. So what is the strong message to us today? The message of Laodicea. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. What is the knock? Sister White says the reproofs, the messages of appeal. These are the knocks. And there is a strong appeal to us at the conclusion of this study now, in the light of the story of Nebuchadnezzar, that when a message comes to him that says, break off your iniquities, follow the instruction that I'm counseling you with, there is an unwillingness to submit to that. And Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1 is a strong appeal to deal with this thought. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1. Therefore, we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. if Nebuchadnezzar would have given earnest heed to the counsel of Daniel and not let it slip, would he have gone insane? No. As Daniel said, if you will do this, your tranquility will be extended. But no. We will examine closely what happened to Nebuchadnezzar after hearing Daniel's interpretation in our next research. But let us now grasp hold of what we have gained here. Take time to be holy. Even the good that you want to do can crowd out the voice of God and the closeness of Jesus to you. And if your day is so crowded that you only have a few moments here or there to stop and commune with Jesus, correct that situation. And trust God to help you. Don't permit the cares of this world, financial, whatever it is, to cause anxiety that you don't trust the Lord, but try to think, oh, I've got to do this, and this person should be doing this and that, and it goes on, and it will drive us to distraction, and if we don't be careful, it will drive us to insanity.
To see the dawn of the darkest day, Christ on the road to Calvary, tried by sinful men, torn and beaten then, nailed to a cross of wood. Is the power of the cross. Christ became sin for us, took the blame, bore the wrath we stand forgiven at the cross. To see